This week on Earth Day, the U.S. takes the lead once again on climate action after 4 years with its hands off the wheel.
You know, these steps will set America on a path of net zero emissions economy by no later than 2050.
Despite butting heads on trade, China becomes an ally in the fight to make the world go green.
世界前途命运
The future of the world should be decided by all countries working together.
And the Americans bringing solar power to frontline communities.
My end goal is to be able to bring solar to every single household in the country.
I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. This week marked the 51st Earth Day, and U.S. President Joe Biden took the opportunity to reset America's role as a credible ally in the fight against climate change.
No nation can solve this crisis on our own, as I know you all fully understand. All of us, and particularly those of us who represent the world's largest economies, we have to step up. We know just how critically important that is, because scientists tell us that this is the decisive decade. You know, the world beyond 1.5 degrees means more frequent and intense fires, floods, droughts, heat waves, and hurricanes. We can't resign ourselves to that future. We have to take action, all of us. The countries that take decisive action now to create the industries of the future will be the ones that reap the economic benefits of the clean energy boom that's coming. This is a moral imperative, an economic imperative, a moment of peril, but also a moment of extraordinary possibilities. Time is short, but I believe we can do this. And I believe that we will do this.
As global temperatures careen past critical levels, the world's two biggest economies are locked in geopolitical and economic chess match. But will that competition extend to climate? Both the U.S. and China have set parallel and equally ambitious emissions goals. We look at whether climate change will turn China and the U.S. into unlikely allies, or will it be another point of conflict?
China has an ambitious goal. While it currently accounts for 1/3 of global emissions, President Xi has pledged China will be carbon neutral by 2060. Beijing plans to slow emissions growth, hitting a peak by 2030 by boosting non-fossil fuel sources and green tech, reducing pollution, and pushing to, quote, electrify everything, while hooking more industries up to carbon-free energy. Not to be outdone, U.S. President Joe Biden is aiming to beat China by a decade. He wants net zero emissions by 2050 and an emissions-free electric grid in 15 years. Both countries have picked key Paris Accord figures to lead their respective climate strategies. China's Xie Zhenhua has a record of deals with the United States, and while John Kerry initially took a swipe at Beijing's plans, he now says he hopes the U.S. can work with China. Parallel policies and key personnel could open up a new front of cooperation between the two economic giants. But Chinese diplomats have warned that working together will depend on Biden's stance on issues including trade, Hong Kong, and Taiwan.
Those issues will never be traded for anything that has to do with climate. That's not going to happen.
Besides the diplomatic balancing act, the two countries are also finding their own journeys to net zero problematic. Xie Zhenhua acknowledges it will be an uphill battle. China's total coal use is still rising, and it needs to balance economic goals with reining in pollution, while partisan divisions in the United States may force Biden to compromise on big policy leaps. But whether the two major economies clash or collaborate, one thing is certain: zeroing out emissions is a key aspiration for both.
Now let's speak with our resident climate expert, Akshat Rathi. Akshat, thanks for coming on the program. The envoys of the world's two biggest emitters recently met. Of course, that's John Kerry and Xie Zhenhua. Any major breakthroughs amongst all this happy talk of cooperation towards climate?
The fact that these two countries are talking and agreeing to work on climate issues is in itself a big deal, because the US and China are at loggerheads in other domains. Now, there was a small print in the statement that they put out, which did not get attention, but it is a pretty big deal. The two countries have agreed to ratify what is known as the Kigali Amendment. Now, this amendment stops a certain gas called hydrofluorocarbons from going into the atmosphere. These gases are tens of thousands of times more warming than carbon dioxide. And it is estimated that if all countries sign up to this pact, then warming could be avoided by as much as 0.5 degrees Celsius by 2100. And that's just a huge win for climate.
Akshat, on the heels of Kerry's trip to China, the U.S. this week is hosting 40 countries virtually. They want to be seen as this leader in climate policy, but you and the team had a piece out this week talking about the credibility gap out of the United States. What is that credibility gap?
I think the first context we should know is the U.S. is historically the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Even today, on a per capita basis, the U.S. emits something like 16 tons per person, which is, 8 times as much as India does on a similar metric. And so the one thing that has been expected, not just of the U.S., but of rich countries, is to do more to cut emissions. And on that, historically, the U.S. has been not a favorable party. So what other parties are now looking for in Biden, who is clearly gunning for a bigger climate ambition from the U.S., is whether the targets he has set is something he can actually deliver on.
All right, our thanks to Bloomberg's climate expert Akshat Rati for joining us. Coming up, the challenges of climate change and nature loss are inextricably linked, and so are their solutions. We speak to the CEO of the world's largest conservation organization about what businesses can do to accelerate climate goals. And it's not just big business. Later, we look at how an innovative solar model is looking to harness the power of marginalized communities in the fight against climate change. This is Bloomberg Green.
I'm Jennifer Zabasanja in New York, and this is your Green Brief. Climate change could lead to grave consequences for India's economy. A new study says that if global warming continues unchecked, monsoons in India will become stronger and more erratic. About 800 million Indians rely directly or indirectly on farming, an industry that could feel the brunt of extreme weather. Whatever impact climate change has on the world, cities are likely to be hardest hit. More than half of all people are now crowded together in urban areas. Built on concrete, they absorb solar radiation, but not water. That means they feel the effects of both heat and heavy rains more acutely. And Lego makes nearly 100,000 tons of plastic bricks each year. But now its owners want to find new environmentally friendly ways of getting rid of plastic waste. The family's fund has about $20 billion and wants to invest in at least one new green plastic project this year. And that's your Green Brief. Anne-Marie?
Thanks, Jen. President Biden's climate push is ambitious, but it'll come down to businesses to execute. Joining us now is Carter Roberts, CEO of the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, the world's largest conservation organization. Established 60 years ago, the foundation has seen climate change become an increasingly large part of its mission. Last year, it raised over $275 million, with 83% of that going directly to conservation efforts around the world. Carter, thanks so much for joining us. You're a graduate of Harvard Business School and held management jobs in corporate America, on top of spending 15 years leading science conservation programs, and all of this before joining WWF. Having been on both sides of the coin, how much does climate change and preserving our environment play in terms of corporate decision making?
Increasingly, climate change and the loss of nature plays a really important role. Corporations are worried about their supply chains. They're concerned about their license to operate in different countries. But more than anything, they are responding to their employees and their consumers, who are asking not just for products that deliver the goods, but products that also don't harm the planet.
What companies do you think are approaching climate goals in the right way?
Oh, I'll tick off a few: Walmart, McDonald's, and Unilever and Mars. But if you take Walmart and McDonald's, for example, they have both set science-based targets that reflect their sector's unique responsibility to help the world meet the Paris Agreement's ambition. They both committed to transparent accounting. They are engaging with their board and their employees and their consumers. And beyond that, they are each looking and investing in nature-based solutions in other parts of the world.
And when you work with businesses, how do you convince executives, which have responsibilities, of course, to their shareholders regarding profits, that these types of investments in clean initiatives, in environmental conservationism, that should be a business priority?
Okay, well, let's talk about shareholders for a second. Increasingly, investors also are looking for companies to have a plan on climate change. And increasingly, regulatory agencies are demanding and requiring a disclosure on materiality, the materiality of the climate risk to the business and their climate footprint. And now we are beginning to see requirements on the materiality of a company's impact on the environment, whether it's restoring the environment or destroying the environment upon which we all depend.
But Carter, how do you rate the pace right now of the corporate world? Is it enough, or does it need to accelerate?
You know, it's not fast enough. If you look at the Fortune 500, just a little more than 60 of the Fortune 500 have signed up to science-based targets. And if you sit down with each one of the leading companies that I've mentioned, and you talk about the pace, they would all say, look, we cannot get there without the active and powerful role of government in setting a level playing field and establishing reliable regulations and a regulatory framework to follow and upon which to base capital investments.
Carter, the end of last year, your foundation received a $100 million donation from Jeff Bezos. Where are you spending that money?
Well, I had a 45-minute call with Jeff Bezos, and he asked for advice on climate change. He had already learned a lot. Then he asked me where I saw the biggest unmet opportunities are in the climate space. A significant chunk of that money we are putting into working in collaboration with foundations and governments to help governments in tropical nations with the biggest forests in the world to expand their park system, shore up their indigenous reserve system, and to create a performance-based mechanism to sustain that over time.
A very profitable, I imagine, 45 minutes for your time at the WWF. Carter Roberts, CEO of the World Wildlife Fund. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The world has dealt with a fickle United States when it comes to climate. Even though it was one of the most influential partners of the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, it left the accord under President Donald Trump and only just rejoined at the start of this year. I sat down with Christiana Figueres, the former executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, who negotiated that historic accord. And I asked her if other nations can trust America's commitment.
I think everyone understands the price that we pay in democracies and the fact that we went through 4 very dark years on climate change in the United States. So I don't think there's a credibility problem. I do think actually that the challenge here is for the U.S. not just to dovetail back into where all the countries are 4 years after or 5 years after the Paris Agreement, but actually to not just meet them shoulder to shoulder, but move forward and show the way. But they're doing a beautiful job, my sense is, of both joining the Concert of Nations, moving forward into a leadership position, and doing that in a very collaborative, open way. So kudos to the US, not easy.
The IEA is saying that carbon emissions in 2021 are set to increase by 5% instead of falling. And the world needs to get to zero. And we have the next few months gearing up for Glasgow. Knowing this information, what needs to be done?
Well, what is very clear is that we need much deeper commitments and followed by action. So the commitments, first of all, need to be short term. Yes, most countries have committed to a 2050 neutrality target. Great. But we also understand today, with the science that has come out since the Paris Agreement, that 2030 is actually the deadline by which we will have determined whether we can get to carbon neutrality by 2050 or not. And that has huge implications for the stability of the economy and of the planet. So we do need further commitments to 2030, much shorter term commitments, and very specific plans of action.
How do you get countries to commit to 2030, which is very short in time now? You know, you have a lot of countries thinking 2050, 2060, as you mentioned. How does the global community get them to think shorter term?
Well, the fact is that there is a lot that is working with us, right? We have the winds of the economy on our back because prices of renewables continue to fall. The wind and solar have already fallen 80% since the Paris Agreement. Technologically wise, we have the winds in our back. We also have the financial sector. I have never seen the financial sector move as quickly and as dramatically as we have seen them move in the past 2 years. And they do so not because they want to, quote unquote, save the planet. They do so because they want to protect their assets, the value of their assets. And they understand that continuing to invest in high carbon assets is actually investing in stranded assets and will decrease very quickly the value of their assets. So whether it is the technology or whether it is finance, both of those are actually blowing very, very determined wind in our backs. That needs then to be met with policy. And that is what the Biden summit is actually moving forward and what we have to continue to move forward toward Glasgow.
Coming up, from transnational organizations fighting climate change to the work of leaders at a local level, how community solar is looking to change the balance of power when it comes to clean energy. That's next. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. Equality is often touted as a key part of a green transition, just as important as new tech and public policy. And while solar is already proving a cornerstone of a low-carbon future, its benefits are far from equally distributed. Marginalized communities are being locked out of the solar boom as prices and mistrust keep panels off of rooftops. But community solar is looking to change all that. We caught up with the people making it happen.
Climate change has been considered a middle-class issue. When a community is faced in survival mode, there tends to be a gap as far as what you can actually do. These are the type of neighborhoods that deal with higher asthma rates and are considered frontline communities. They're closer to the incinerators, they're closer to the railroad tracks. However, they're left out of clean energy.
Crystal Hansley is trying to expand the reach of renewable energy and address systematic imbalances in the process. She's the first Black woman to run a company specializing in community solar, a fast-growing part of the industry that she hopes will make it easier for marginalized communities to go green and see economic benefits in the process.
My vision is to bring solar to every city in the country. So cities like Baltimore City will be able to be a part of that just transition across the nation.
Solar is going to be fairly critical to the overall decarbonization goal. It's one of the cheapest forms of clean energy around, and costs are steadily declining. To really get a sense of how far solar has come, you need to look at it over the last sort of 10 years. In the early 2010s or so, solar electricity, it would cost you about $300 per megawatt hour. Today, you can get that electricity for around $30 a megawatt hour. And what has really driven that is a sort of fall in the cost of the solar panels. Manufacturing efficiency has steadily improved, as well as the efficiency of the panel.
Those cost declines have turned solar into a booming industry in recent years. In the US, not even a pandemic could stop 2020 from becoming a record year for new installations. But those gains haven't been evenly distributed.
Traditionally, there have been barriers that precluded African American communities or underrepresented communities from accessing solar for the simple fact that you needed to own a home or have a 700 credit score to get a nice interest rate on a solar loan.
As a result, many minorities are left out of the savings that can come with switching to solar. Now, a new type of solar business is looking to solve that problem.
Community solar is a model in which anyone who might consider putting solar on their roof, but is not able to do so for whatever purposes, signs up to receive a share of the electricity from a larger project.
Community solar started picking up steam in 2016, and it's since spread to nearly every state. One up-and-coming hotspot is the Greater Baltimore area. This farm on the city's outskirts, built in 2020, was developed by Bith Energy, whose CEO, Robert Wallace, is one of the few black business owners in the solar industry.
Baltimore, like every other city, in my opinion, needs solar energy. It reduces the carbon footprint, but it also is an economic engine. Our process involves using local minority and women businesses to help build the projects. Baltimore is about 2/3 African American. I believe that solar energy, like every other industry, should reflect the communities in which it serves. And that is a smart business principle. I think it's the right thing to do and the moral thing to do.
Wallace says his company has 3 community solar farms currently serving the Baltimore area, with another 7 in the works. Meanwhile, Crystal Hansley of We Solar is working to make sure Baltimore's poorest residents can reap the benefits of community solar. State subsidies allow low-income residents to save up to 25% on their electric bill if they make the switch.
So that's really huge for folks who are still, struggling while we climb our way out of this pandemic.
Ultimately, community solar is just one part of the remarkable success story of the solar industry, which has become an undeniable bright spot in the fight against climate change. But it isn't yet clear how big a part this new business model will play.
In terms of the scale at which solar more broadly can grow, a lot of the growth today is actually coming from utility scale power plants. In terms of adding more clean energy to the grid overall, those projects are definitely doing more. But community solar can definitely allow more companies, more people to get access to sort of the benefits of solar.
My company has begun doing projects globally. We just kicked off a project in the Virgin Islands. We've marketed in West Africa and Latin America. These emerging global markets, we have a burgeoning middle class. I think the community solar model is the perfect model to accelerate the penetration of solar in those markets.
It's cool and awesome, to say that you have a company that's not only fighting climate change, but also saving low-income families money. My end goal is to be able to bring solar to every single household in the country. That's my goal, and I think it's definitely viable and feasible.
That does it for this week's edition, but keep the conversation going. Follow us on Twitter @Climate. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green.